I just released a new true crime episode on my other channel, Donovan Dread True Crime, about the unsolved case of Elizabeth Barraza, who was murdered in cold blood in her own driveway. The links are below. For this episode, I thought it would be fun to read some of the strange and weird encounters from the comments section. I hope you enjoy. Here are your stories. I'm retired law enforcement, and when I was a young officer, I was working in a very mountainous area. I spent most of my shift just driving dark wooded roads. One night, I was talking to a seasoned officer about freaky stuff we have seen. I told him that a few days ago I was driving back from one of the furthest towns in our area, about 2 a.m. when I saw a woman walking on the side of the road. The area I saw her in was very dark, and no houses out there at all, so I couldn't figure out why she was walking in that area so late at night. I saw her, but I was going too fast to stop right there, so I turned around a little further away. But when I got back to where I saw her, she was gone. No trace of her, nothing. I told him I was a little freaked out about it. He told me that several years ago, he was in the same area and had stopped at the same spot to give this same woman a ride. He said she walked over to his patrol car, opened the door, and got in. He asked her where she was going, and she told him the name of the nearest town. Then she smiled at him, thanked him for picking her up, and then vanished right before his eyes. He laughed at me, and he also told me, "Don't be surprised if you run into her again. She isn't the only one either." I have seen some freaky things out there. Just downright freaky. Love your channel. I had a friend in school whose last name was Donovan. Stay cool. They are everywhere. My mother told us of many super creepy experiences she had while growing up in a rural area. One of them that comes to my mind is when she was about 10 or 12 years old. Her mom went out and left her with her older siblings. She prepared lunch before leaving and left it wrapped up in a basket. To discourage them from getting to the food prematurely, she hung the basket on a door with very strict instructions. Then close to lunchtime, she heard an unusually loud creaking sounds coming from the open door. To her shock and horror, she saw a little girl, the exact replica of herself, dress, hoop earrings and all, hanging on the top of the door close to the basket. Of course, she screamed and got the attention of her siblings. By then, the figure had disappeared. Well, they just passed it off as their sister who was always seeing things. My mom was a gifted person who could see into the realm of the spirit, good or bad. Interesting, as a friend of mine swore she and a friend of hers both saw something like that here in Alberta, Canada, walking down some train tracks behind her home about 15 years ago. I thought she was bullshitting me as a joke at first because she knows I don't believe in the cryptozoology stuff. She was serious as soon as I realized and swore she saw this wolf-like thing walking on its hind legs. I believe she believes she saw it. Whether she did or not, she sure believes she did. A man I know is a former police officer. He had retired and was working as a security guard when he told me this account. Years ago, he was on patrol late at night on tribal lands. He was driving slowly on a dirt road and saw a huge dog walking in the middle of the road. Its rear was towards him. He continued to approach it. At about 10 feet, it stopped and faced him. He swears that it had the face of a man. Then it sauntered off the road and disappeared into the forest. I'm an officer in Arkansas. What I saw changed me. We rotate from days to nights every 3 months, and 2 weeks back on nights. I was driving through a neighborhood, and what I saw I will never forget. As I turned off the highway onto the street, I observed a huge something, maybe 8 foot, levitating in the air, speeding down the street. I stopped my patrol car, turned on my spotlight, and waited. I then drove down to the intersection where I saw this thing, and it has disappeared. I didn't patrol that neighborhood that night after seeing it. I saw one of these creatures known as Dogman in Cape Cod, Massachusetts. If I was alone, I honestly would have thought I was hallucinating. Thank God someone was with me, and I asked them, "Do you see what I'm looking at?" and asked them to describe it because I didn't want to put anything in their head. They described exactly what I was looking at, and honestly, I couldn't make this up even if I wanted to. It was so crazy that I have no other way to describe it. I used to drive a semi, and one trip in the state of Washington on I-5 going north, I had a large black hairy animal stop on the side of the highway. It stood up and I noticed its hind legs kind of looked like a dog's, but it was higher. And when it looked my way, its eyes were red. Its face and head was shaped long and narrow, and it had very long hair. It ran across the highway almost like a horse in a lope. Scary. I have a photo of a shapeshifter. I bought an old 1930s photo album from northern Quebec. It had a photo of 2 Native Americans outside an old general store in a horse-drawn carriage. They were photographed as one half human and half sheep. The other form was a sheep, but you could make out a human face underneath the face of the sheep. The big secret is the fact that the Black Ops military complex used to breed and train dogmen and werewolves in Virginia and Colorado. The dogman creatures were getting out of hand as they were breeding in the wild, so they started calling them back to the 2 compounds via GPS and communication devices implanted in the creature's ear canal. When they got back to their compound, these creatures were being euthanized. Supposedly, according to a recently retired SWAT soldier, every county in every state has 4 to 20 dogmen, and sometimes the same amount of werewolves. The werewolves are more sophisticated creatures, bigger and smarter than a dogman. Also, they can speak fluent English. Werewolves are used by CIA handlers in South and Central America drug wars. 2 werewolves can take out a whole squadron of drug defense soldiers. Just a note, the Black Ops secret military complex controls almost everything in the world, including the secret space program and UFOs. They do have separate departments, but are all Black Ops, and their actions are paid for by your tax dollars through the Pentagon Secret Black Ops Fund. Most of the elected Washington congressmen know little or nothing about these operations.
When I was 17, I used to hang out with my buddy literally all the time during the summertime. We really had nothing else better to do. I can distinctly remember one evening we were bored. I think I had about $8 or $9. I told my friend, "Hey, let's go walk to the store and get some Mountain Dews. Come back and play video games." We did those things already, but for whatever reason, I was really craving a Mountain Dew then. I don't know why. He agreed, and we both walked down to the store. Now, the store was quite a bit far away, and you had to walk through this really sketchy long stretch of road that had thick woods on both sides. Being in California, at least middle to upper California, these were like forests. Like the kind of forest you see in the Pacific Northwest. Not the shrubbery and loose woods that you would see down in Southern California. I thought I should make that distinction. We had walked this stretch of road many times. I think it was a little over a mile, maybe a mile and a half, but we would go there often to get snacks, soda, and whatever else stuff that a 17-year-old eats. Well, this time was really no different. It being a summer evening, the sun was still out and it was still beautiful weather, active people walking their dogs and cars going back and forth. It wasn't a dead road by any means, but there were fewer houses. I'm wanting to say all this stuff because I want to mention that this was a very lively area. Maybe not as lively as any downtown area, but there were people present, cars going by. We were maybe halfway there to the store when we heard strange noises off to the forest across the street. It made us both stop, look at each other, and question, what was that we had just heard? It sounded like a dog getting ripped apart or something. Maybe like a cougar attacking a dog. I think after discussing it for a moment, that was the conclusion we came to, but it didn't quite sound like that. Living in California, I've had my fair share of hearing cougars, although I've only heard a few dogs, but this is exactly what it would sound like. We kept on walking and going back on our conversation of whatever it was we were talking about. Maybe 10 minutes later, we're now nearing the end of the walk and we hear it again. Except for this time, the noises are more distorted and closer. As if whatever it was following us paralleled us in the woods. This time, though, the sounds were different. It didn't sound like another animal attacking a dog or something. When I mentioned it the first time, I mentioned the accompanying noises of a cougar making noise, like a hissing sound, along with the whimpering and whining of a dog, even though they didn't sound quite right, not like you'd actually hear. I know it's hard to explain, but when we got near the end of the walk and we heard these noises again and they were different, it's almost like the sound of a dog and the hissing of a cat or something, like that was overlaid on top of each other. It sounded very large and very distorted, like playing through a lo-fi radio or something. Whatever it was seemed to sound really big. Imagine a bison making that noise, something of enormous size. It's really hard to describe accurately. My friend and I just kept looking at each other like, what on earth is making these noises? There were some passers-by on the other side of the street. A biker and a lady walking her German Shepherd, all three of which, including the dog, made glances at the noises and just seemed to carry on. The lady, if I remember right, had her headphones in. I remember that she looked over, too, signifying that my friend and I were not indeed crazy and we were hearing something strange and out of the ordinary. Here's where the story gets even crazier. We go to the store and we both load up on a Mountain Dew. Since being 17, you seem to think you're really cool if you drink Mountain Dew. I'm really not sure what my obsession was at that age. We're leaving and we're about halfway back down this long stretch of road. Keep in mind it's probably somewhere between 7 and 8 o'clock in the midst of the summer. 7 or 8 o'clock, I think, and it's still sunny out. Cars are going by. There's still people walking. It's still lively. It's California, after all. The noises began to get even more violent sounding, if that makes any sense. It sounded like a flock of animals being ripped apart, minus the skin-ripping noises and blood and tissues being torn. I don't know how else to accurately tell you. That's what it sounded like. Like you would hear a roar, and overlaid with that roar was what sounded like distorted dog screams. I don't know. My friend, when we ended up getting back, said that he might think it might be a skinwalker, but I don't know. It didn't sound far off in the woods. I had never even heard of a skinwalker before. He ended up telling me what a skinwalker was. He's not native, but he does have native friends and has heard of what they are before. Except we were in California, nowhere near any reservation that I am or was aware of at the time. Well, come to find out later that night, people in the area had reported seeing a large, strange, upright canine figure in the area. I know this because he called a friend of his, or maybe it was a family member, one or the other, I can't quite remember. They were talking about the weird noises that we had just heard a few hours prior. He'd gotten in the conversation over the phone. Since his friend or family member, whichever it was on speakerphone, he didn't know he was on speakerphone, was talking about it and saying that, yeah, the whole neighborhood's kind of freaked out right now. They're not sure what it was. I almost mentioned to him, asking if he meant werewolf. My friend mentioned the word werewolves, and he said, nah, that's not what it was. Something else entirely, some strange animal. We don't know what it was. Then the rest of the conversation just went normal. Since then, I've always had this thing that I do believe that werewolves or animals like that exist somewhere. Maybe a skinwalker, maybe a werewolf. I don't know. Out here in California, though, I wouldn't put it past me that something weird is out there looking in the darkness of the woods.
Thanks for listening to these stories. If you would like me to read more stories from the comments section, let me know, and please post your strange and weird encounters. Don't forget to check out Lilith Dread's channel, the link is below, and of course, if you're into true crime and you like my narrations, check out my channel Donovan Dread True Crime. I just released a news story about the unsolved case of Elizabeth Barraza. Take care and God bless.